Hello, first module of this week, week 11. So this is section 4.7, Glottochronology. This is really just a continuation of the log function section. So you're all familiar with the idea of the family tree. So you have the idea of descendants and ancestors that, for example, in this family tree here, Cleveland is a child of Francisco and Amanda. And we kind of know how to construct a family tree. All we need is the information about each the level of the tree. Okay, these kind of family trees are actually used in a lot of places, not just genealogy. So for example, in biology, there's a thing called the phylogenetic tree. Excuse me. And so this is the tree of life. And so now it's not, now we have the idea of ancestors and descendants, but the idea is, you know, we look at the current species around the world and the different family of species, etc. And in the tree of life, with evolution, you know, we're all come back from a common ancestor. And at some point, a new species arrives that leads to a branch point and like different branches. So for example, here you can see vertebrates is one branch and arthropods is another branch. And if you sort of go back along the tree, you can find a certain point where they were joined together. And so at that point there must be some common ancestor to both arthropods and vertebrates. Okay, and the way that biologists construct these trees is that, you know, they compare different creatures and they look at the sort of familiarities and then they can sort of patch these together and say, okay, you know, mollusks are further away from vertebrates than arthropods are, so therefore we should put them further back in the tree of life. So by looking at these kind of similarities, you can build these trees. And nowadays, because of genetics, they can compare DNA, and it's a much more straightforward job. So what we're going to look at today is the idea of languages, that there is a tree of language. So for example, you know, Romance languages, right? There's Italian and French and Spanish, Catalan, Romanian, Sardinian. These are all languages that came from Latin. And, you know, there's Germanic languages like, so English, Dutch, German, Swedish. And so if you look at languages, we can try and do the same thing with languages as we did with the tree of life. Okay. And so if you look at this sort of diagram here, you can see how far back you go before sort of things have sort of branched away. So it's saying like, oh, around 1700 years ago, Romance languages started. 5,500 years ago, it's where Romance languages and Germanic languages broke off. And if you go further back, you can see where Celtic languages broke off from there, etc. Okay, so how do you go about doing this? I mean, how can you find out things that happened like 8,000 years ago? It's hard, but what you do is you look at the languages, and the same as with the animals, you try and look similarities and say, okay, these languages are closer to this language, so therefore they would have branched off at some point. Okay, and so what you do is you look at words. So for example, you look at a nice word like peace, and you can see, for example, that peace, okay, that's kind of like comes from the Latin pax. So you've got parce in Italian and Romanian, parci in Maltese, pay, P-A-I-X in French, P-A-U in Catalan, however you pronounce that, paz in Spanish and Portuguese. Whereas you look at salam in Arabic, well, that's close to shalom in Hebrew and shlam alat in Assyrian. So these languages are related. And you can look at how you say it in Swedish, Fred, it looks like F-R-E-D is peace in Swedish, but that's kind of like Frieden in German and Fridur in Icelandic, and Freda in Dutch and Flemish. Okay, so by looking at these words and seeing commonalities, you can kind of start to put together a language tree. And the module question for you this time is just choose a common word, something like tree or three or father or mother or something. Go to Google Translate, find 6 different languages and just see what those words are in different languages and see, these words are close to each other. Okay. So there's the idea of building a tree, but then there's also the question of how far back can we put these branches? So when did one language branch off from another? And that science is called Glottochronology. So it's a branch of linguistics. It's the science of dating languages. And well, there's an assumption is that languages change. So you've probably heard this, that languages are living things. New words come in, old words become redundant and get no longer used. And so the idea is that if you're given a vocabulary of a language at a beginning date, say 1,000 words or 200 words or whatever, over time that vocabulary will decay. So maybe, for example, in 200 years' time, of those 1,000 words, only 985 of those words are still in use. And so this is a situation we've kind of seen before. And if we can assume that the chances of a word decaying is constant over time and the word that we use, okay, so then the number of the rate of change of this vocabulary is going to be proportional to the vocabulary itself, right? So if you've got 1,000 words, over time it's going to lose 10 times more words than if you only start off with 100 words. Then you have a differential equation, n prime equals kn. And we know that. We know the solution to that is the exponential. So we're going to let n be the number of words. And so our math problem then is, if we've got n prime equals kn, and we start off with a words, then we know the solution to that is n equals a e to the power kt. So k is some kind of decay constant, t is some time, we choose some starting time, and we go up to some time which is kind of now. Okay. So, for example, Mandarin. So in 1950, these 2 linguists did this famous paper where they had a list of 210 words in Mandarin in the year 950, and then 1,000 years later in 1950, 167 were still in use. So Mandarin is a good language for this, right? Because the Chinese write things down, and so they can find things from whichever dynasty it is, and they can figure out these vocabulary. So, of course, since we can't know what they said 1,000 years ago, we're just relying on written stuff. But notice if we've got 2 points, this is enough data to find the decay constant. And so we know that n of 1,000 is going to be 167, the word's still in use, and that equals 210, the original list, times e to the 1,000, because it's 1,000 years, times k. And we can solve that, right, by taking natural logs. And so we get natural log of 167 divided by 210 equals 1000 K. So K is approximately negative 0.0002291137. So it's a small negative constant. Okay, it has to be negative because it's going down. It has to be small, right, because we expect this rate of decay to be very slow. Okay, you just don't, in the past, you just didn't throw out words all the time. There's been other studies for this, and linguists have found approximately the same value of K. Okay, so by taking an average of all these constants, the current consensus is that K is negative 0.000217. And so that's the value we're going to use when we're doing things. So for example, let's look at Latin and Italian. So we start off with a vocabulary of 210 words in Latin. These are kind of common words, and 144 of those remain in Italian in 1995. So the question is, when did Italian split from Latin? Okay, so the equation, plug these into the equation. The words now is 144, words back then were 210, e to the negative 0.000217. That's the value of K we're using, and the only thing that's not known is the time. And so again, we solve that by dividing by 210 and taking natural log, and we see that T now is 1739 years. Okay, so 1739 years ago from 1995 was 256 AD. So this model says that Italians split from Latin at 256 AD. And this is actually consistent with surviving texts which show serious changes beginning to take place in Latin around 350 AD. Okay, so of course there's going to be some sort of disconnect because the written is you've got to find what you have. Okay. I got interested in this because I read an article in the New York Times. So this is a controversial theory, it's pretty recent, is that all Western, most African and many Asian languages evolved from a single language around 12,000 years ago. And they call this language Nostratic. So if you think about it, even though the decay constant is very small, 12,000 years is a long time. That's a lot of decay. So this is why this thing is controversial. So if you're interested in that, you can. I've got a link up there to that article. Okay, and so in the homework, there's a question. You can look it up in the reader. I've got the PDF on Blackboard there, and to ask a question about German and English. When did they break away from each other? Now the problem is, of course, is we don't know we don't have examples of the common ancestor of German and English. It's given a name. I think it's called Western German, and so. But anyway, if we compare German and English now, we look at common vocabulary. The idea is we can go both back in time to find a common ancestor, and so it's like going from German to English. The decay is actually double that period, right? Because the English is decaying and the German is decaying. Anyway, that's something for you to look at. Okay.